A leading Texas lawmaker has signed arrest warrants for 52 Democrats who left Texas to avoid voting on an election reform bill. The warrants were signed yesterday after the Texas Supreme Court ruled that those legislators can be arrested and brought back to the chamber. The decision reverses an earlier lower court ruling that said lawmakers couldn't be arrested. And Team Rising is here to weigh in. Editor-in-chief at The Real News and host of Working People podcast, Maximilian Alvarez, and author and senior editor at Reason.com, Robbie Suave. Welcome to the show, guys. Robbie, starting with you, what do you think about this new order to arrest these lawmakers?
I think it's very important to clarify that they're not really in danger of being arrested and taken to prison. They're in danger of being hauled back to the literal government building. Obviously this is kind of an absurd sort of political posturing thing. Of course, them leaving the Capitol to deny a quorum so there could not be a vote on this bill was also kind of absurd political theater as well. It's just kind of absurd political theater in every direction, in my opinion. The exact kind of thing that probably most citizens, voters find obnoxious when both sides do it. And obviously, the kind of lionizing of these Democrats in the media would be totally the reverse if Republicans were doing this, but everyone would hypocritically adopt the opposite posture, and I think that's transparently clear at this point. So whether you agree with what's being done or disagree with it is just whether you have a D or an R next to your name, it metaphorically speaking, for how you feel ideologically.
Yeah, and Max, let me put out what I think is a consistent principle here. One, I support the right of lawmakers to take whatever action that, within whatever nonviolent action they can to try to express their opinion, to try to oppose legislation. I also support the right of the majority party to try to ram it through using whatever legal powers they have. Lindsey Graham has threatened that Republicans would deny Democrats a quorum to pass their $3.5 trillion, if their $3.5 trillion legislation. If he tried to do that, I'd support the sergeant at arms going up and rounding up Lindsey Graham and hauling him back into the Senate chamber. There was a couple decades ago, a Republican was dragged in feet first so that Bob Byrd could have a quorum in the Senate. And hey, the fair is fair. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't kind of agree with that, because I'm often berating Democrats for not using all the tools in the tool belt like Republicans often do. Instead, Democrats make a big show of following the rules at the expense of actually fighting for voters. And so, yeah, I mean, political theater always being a part of the spectacle of American politics, I do think that it's a good thing, right, that these Democratic lawmakers denied the quorum because ultimately what I see happening in Texas and around the country is a very serious and dramatic and awful assault on voting rights that is going to have really serious implications. And so if this is a way to stop it, then how could I not support that? But I think the real thing that is very depressing about this, right, is that these Texan lawmakers denied the quorum, went to Washington, D.C. in the hopes that they would get an assist from the federal government, and they have not, right? I mean, and now you're starting to see some of those Democratic lawmakers kind of go back to Texas with their tail between their legs. I mean, because they do have other stuff to do, right? And there are other issues that need to be fought for, or because they see the writing on the wall that they're not going to get the cavalry assistance that they were expecting. And in that way, I think, Biden and Senate Democrats and House Democrats have really let them down and have let the voters down across the board.
Well, and my cynical view here is, simply Texas Democrats win more seats if you want to influence the outcome of this. But I'd pose to both, Max first, if you don't mind. What do you think the on the ground in Texas, what is not within the legislature, but do you think that there is major support for what they are trying to block? Do you think that the people are actually with these legislators?
You mean the Democratic legislators?
Yes,
or
the Democratic legislators.
So, I mean, I know that, having spoken to a number of organizers and workers in Texas, I mean, I think this is very anecdotal, but my read of the vibe is that, they do support it because they see this as a kind of direct assault on democracy, right? And I think that one of the things that I've been hearing more that I actually would really want to emphasize, right, that speaks not just to people on the ground in Texas, but to all of us and how we view kind of the political terrain in the United States. One of the things that I hate the most about our political culture that I've seen time and again when we talk about what's going on in Texas, whether it was the power grid disaster that happened in the winter, whether it is this current assault on voting rights or any other issue, is when these things happen, you see this really vicious downward punching response from a lot of folks who say, well, the people there deserved it, right? This is what they voted for. Like, there's just such a disdain that people have. And I say this mainly directed at Democrats, right? People who call themselves Democrats and liberals. They are so quick to write off working people in Texas, in Florida, in Arkansas, as if like they are solely to blame for the machinations of evil politicians and their corporate overlords, right? And that is just such a bad way to approach these politics. And we're seeing in Texas why that is a bad way to approach it, because the legislature is actually trying to strip the people's ability to have a say in their government. So why would you hold them accountable for the very thing that their government is doing against their wishes?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I mostly agree with that analysis. I think assault on democracy is kind of a phrase that gets overused at this point. So I don't really agree with the provisions of this bill either. I don't know that it's like a fundamental assault on our democracy, but I also don't know if it's an assault on our democracy when the legislators leave the building to avoid taking a vote and then have to be hunted down by bounty hunters. Is that an assault on democracy when you force the legislators to go back and vote? It seems like everything these days is an assault on democracy, but democracy is just like the process for deciding what the government is going to do. And as a libertarian, I tend to be against it anyway. I guess I don't fetishize the process itself. A lot of these politicians are doing very bad things. And it actually doesn't ever seem to me that we can, the tinkering with the process doesn't seem to produce better outcomes to me.
And we do have an update on what Max was talking about. They came to the Texas Democrats came to Washington, insisting that Congress pass S1, the For the People Act. And in the middle of the night, last night, there was actually an incremental advance on that. Jeff Merkley spoke, I think, at 4:41 a.m. And then Joe Manchin spoke, and Manchin's speech was actually quite newsworthy, because Manchin said that he had come to an agreement with the rest of the Democratic caucus on a way forward on S1. He had been in opposition to S1 before. He said he just wasn't going to support it. They've been negotiating it the last several weeks. He has now come to terms with Schumer, with everybody else. They put forward a motion to move forward on a debate for S1. Every Republican voted to block it, and every Democrat, including Kyrsten Sinema and Manchin, voted to move forward. So it needed 60 votes. It failed. Schumer then brought to the floor basically the Disclose Act that would ban dark money. That was blocked by Republicans. He then brought forward a bill to ban gerrymandering, just to ban gerrymandering. That got the support of all of the Democrats, opposed by all of the Republicans. This is trying to set up the next phase, which will come in the fall, where there will be a showdown. Does Manchin support the bill that he supports more than he supports the filibuster? And we'll find out in the fall. But Max and Robbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, well, next on Rising, do progressives keep losing? Brianna Joy Gray weighs in when Rising returns.